Hello and welcome to MotorInc First. And this is a very serious conversation that we're going to have, particularly heavy on my heart because I didn't get to go out and meet this motorcycle because Shumi was out riding the 390 Duke. Tough one?
So I'm told that I compare every motorcycle to the 390 Duke, and today I'm in trouble because that's the motorcycle we're going to talk about. So what are you going to do?
You're going to be talking 390 Duke constantly.
but, but we solved this. So in the studio with us today is me, Rishabh, and Karthik. All three of us have had a chance to ride the 390 Duke. In fact, if you take the track environment, Karthik actually put a lot more laps than me. On the street, I think I have the most miles.
Yeah.
So we've got a fairly large database of 390 information. Why are we smiling so much?
Because I said I didn't get to go ride the bike. And it was true. They were going to go ride it. And I was like, I'm not going to come there and watch. Okay. I'm not going to do that. It's a 390. It's a track. All of that. And then somehow these guys, Rishabh and Shumi, made it happen that I got some time with the bike. And as it turned out, I got a fair bit of time. And
All right. So let me ask you the first question. Big change? Yes or no?
yes.
Improvement?
Yes.
Value for money?
Massive.
Thrilled?
Blown.
Okay, so that sets the tone of what's going to happen next. Shall we get into the details then?
Okay.
Okay.
You had more time with the motorcycle to take it in. I didn't get any time like that, to sit and just really look at it. What did it feel like when you first saw it? I just noticed that there's one blue and there's one orange, and that's about it.
KTM's designs are not to everyone's taste. This Duke 390 will also not be to everyone's taste, and this is what they're going to do for the 200 and the 125 Dukes as well. So just like when the RCs came out, there was a big stir about saying, oh, that looks ugly, and then the GP edition sort of fixes it with the dark screen.
Right.
I think we're going to adapt to how this bike looks, but can I call it classically good looking? No. My feeling is, I saw it for the first time and I thought of somebody with a winter coat with a really high collar, or maybe a Dracula type of person with a really high collar. That's how long and high those tank extensions have become.
Yeah.
And KTM have done the boomerang style LED DRLs on the side, but they've not packaged it with the headlight. They flank the headlight and there's a gap in the middle. And my first reaction was, that's where the dust is going to go and sit. And I'm not sure how easy it will be to keep the Duke clean in those little details. But it looks bigger, it looks expensive. The orange is a little too orange for me, honestly, because that entire tank shroud is orange, the tank itself is orange, and the seat is orange. So it's a little too orange for me. It's a KTM color, and I know. And I also think that sometimes they overdo it. And I think the Duke 390 is an example of how to overdo orange. So they've been enjoying playing with the interplay between gloss orange and matte orange, which on the GP edition RC390 actually looks very good. I think on the Duke, it looks like too much orange. Just to put a fine point on it, when we were bringing the bike into the studio, the footage that you're going to see throughout this MotorInc First, they gave us the blue one saying, you're going to take it to the studio. So that should tell you that it's not just us feeling like it's too much orange. I think it is a little bit too much orange.
Right. Now, importantly, KTM's always, not always, started off being great value and that kind of deteriorated over time. And along with that, one of the things that's remained a constant is that they're great value, so we overlooked a lot of things. Like it didn't feel always, high quality, not everywhere, right? How much has that changed, if it has?
I think it has changed. Like the KTM switchgear, like my KTM's engine kill switch is not red. It sort of approximates red and it really annoys me 9 years later. So obviously this is a big issue for me. But now you've got new switches. They do feel more premium. The quality of the plastics has gone up. There is a slightly weird design for the 5-way buttons or whatever you call it to operate the menus with. But fundamentally the clickiness of the switches, etc., gone up. Right? The levers, they're slightly better quality. The adjustment mechanism, better quality. We were always saying adjustable suspension. Why can it not be standard in India? Well, adjustable suspension is standard. The aluminium subframe at the back, right? Now, I was asking why suddenly you've got an aluminium subframe, TVS has an aluminium subframe. And they were saying it's just that the cost of casting aluminium has become closer and closer and closer to tubular steel.
All right.
The irony of it is that as much as aluminium has material advantages over iron and steel, the steel trellis subframe was actually lighter than the cast aluminium subframe. So they haven't actually lost weight on the subframe using aluminium. Yeah, it's cooler to look at for sure. And it raises your sense of premium of the bike visually. But that's not where they've lost weight.
Oh,
Yeah,
Interesting.
It's sort of like, whoa, really?
And when you were talking about the changes, the only thing that stuck in my head from my time on the bike was, oh, the engine kill switch and all actually looks red now. It looks properly red.
Yeah, that's
Anyways, so where have they saved weight?
So the engine itself is larger now. It's 398.63 cc. It says so on the engine case. So it's 399 cc effectively, but it's 1 kilo lighter than before. The fundamental change inside the engine is that the stroke has gone up by 4 mm. Still not a long stroke engine. It's an over square engine. It's less over square than before, which is why they're able to make a little bit more torque. But it has as much to do with the displacement and the tuning as it has to do with the bore and stroke change. So don't assume that just because the stroke is longer, the KTM will make more torque. I don't think that's actually what's happened.
Okay.
The fundamental engine is larger and lighter.
Okay.
From the RC390, the wheels and the brake combination has come over. That accounts for almost 2 kilos of weight.
Okay.
If you remember, in the FAQ series, we've done a series on pointless accessories for the 390 Duke, and the hand guards that KTM used to give and the splatter guard were in there. Well, that's a weight saving on this bike because they don't exist. So there is no hand guard and there is no splatter guard, and that's another place where they saved it. And remember, the splatter guard was mounted on the swing arm.
Right.
So it was moving unsprung weight. It was under the spring. So obviously, between the wheels, brakes, and that, there is quite an impact.
Okay.
So net, you're about 4 kilos under, although that's curb weight. There was some confusion about the European website listing the same weight as dry and India was listing as curb. We've confirmed that the European website was an error. They've taken that number down. It is 168 kilos curb weight.
Wow.
But it has a 15-liter tank, remember? So it's carrying more fuel and still 4 kilos under. So the bike is actually even lighter than just the 4 kilo claim.
Wow. That's impressive.
That's very impressive, especially given that 2 kilos and something is coming from the wheels and brake setup, right? Which is under the springs. So the thumb rule is that's 3 times. So if they've saved 2 kilos there, it'll feel like the bike is 6 kilos lighter on its own. So it's a much lighter machine than before.
Right.
But because they've got the bigger engine, they're able to make more torque earlier. So torque is up 2 Newton meters, but it's 500 RPM earlier. The power is also up 2.5 bhp, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's also happening 500 RPM.
But it's got more torque, early in the rev range, more power, lighter. It all adds up.
And I'll just finish the gearing also. The gearbox has the same gearing as before. Okay. 6 gears, no changes there. But the final drive ratios have been adjusted.
Okay.
Okay, so what they've done is 15 tooth front sprocket gone down to 14.
Okay.
Which means more acceleration, less top speed. And at the back, they used to have a 45 tooth sprocket. Now it's a 43.
Okay.
So the rated top speed now is 155.
Okay.
So anybody who's complaining about, oh, the old one used to do 170, it's very difficult to do 170. I've done it at the racetrack a lot, but in any
that's
other condition. Yeah. No, indicated bhi chodo. I'm saying even if it genuinely does 170, where are you going to use it, right? The function of that 170 is only how calm can it make 100 out on the highway. So for me, 170, 155, we are in the same ballpark. But obviously this bike is much quicker.
Right. Because should we talk about the riding the bike?
Let's talk about
because of the speed. Because 155, what did you see on the straight?
So we were both seeing 168, 169s on the Bajaj track. And honestly, he got a lot more laps. So he had more time to settle into the bike. I got basically 5. In those 5, I managed to find the confidence to wind it up to 168 before going to the last corner of the Bajaj track. And it felt completely unstressed and unstrained doing that. So if you remember the older KTMs, they had a sense of strain. They were not unstrained engines, but it didn't get worse as you get faster. So that was what it did. This bike actually feels a lot calmer and a lot more like, I got this. And you know, the authority with which does a 80 or 100 or 120, it remains more or less in the same ballpark going 168.
When he rode the bike, we rode them on 2 different days, right? When he rode the bike, he just told me, yeah, you'll do about... he managed to do whatever, 168, 169. So I usually assume that I will be at least 5-7 kmph off because I'm much heavier, right? So the next day when I was riding it, and he told me the only thing is you're a little short on space that you can't push back enough. So he actually scooched up onto the pillion seat. So when I was on the straights, that's all I did. I just pushed back onto the pillion seat, crouched and went for it. 168, 169, 168, 169. If you're not really focusing, 165. So with my weight, if it could do that consistently again and again, it says something about the kind of performance in its back.
And the performance has changed dramatically. So out on the street, this motorcycle, if you remember the old KTM, 6,000 RPM is where the motorcycle sort of wakes up with both eyes. Before that, it's sort of doing its thing. It's easier to ride below 5,000 RPM now.
Mm.
I'm not going to say it's thrilling to ride below 5,000 RPM, but it's not slow below 5,000. But you will feel some amount of vibration. It's not like a high frequency buzz. It's more like a thumper. Like it's going on, right? 5,000 RPM, the bike wakes up. Whereas earlier 6,000 RPM is where the bike wakes up. And then it really goes. And the more revs you bring, the less there is vibration.
Yeah.
So once again, KTM has pulled out their usual different sensibility in motorcycling by making a motorcycle that the faster you go, the better it feels.
Yeah.
The slower you go, the more it encourages saying, maybe you want to do this a little bit faster. So after a while, I found myself running lower and lower gears through traffic. Obviously, I don't worry about fuel economy too much. But I started using lower and lower gears to keep the revs higher and higher so that I'd feel more connected to the experience and have less vibes. But 115 kilometers at fairly high speeds, I came into the office with my hands properly buzzed and tingling. So as a tourer, there is vibration that you're going to have to deal with. Deal breaker, no, but could KTM possibly have fixed it? I think they should have. So if you look at the 2013 Generation 1 models, they had some amount of rawness to it. The 2017s were very smooth. This has gone back to being a little bit more raw in that sense. So there is more performance. It does feel more urgent. It does accelerate harder. It feels a little wilder in a very sophisticated way, but there is some amount of vibration.
Yeah.
But the good news is the quick shifter is now standard and it works.
Right. So now, in the world of just street riding, you have a lot more aids now to use, right? As standard again?
Yeah. So the IMU is a standard part of the package, and therefore cornering, ABS, etc., etc., etc. is all there. Traction control, you name it, it's all there.
Are they adjustable? Are there any? Because I really didn't mess around with it.
Honestly, I didn't mess with much of it either. So I'm not sure that there are levels here. But I think at the level of the 390, I'm not actually expecting much adjustability there. It's got 3 modes. The rain mode cuts some amount of power and torque.
Correct.
KTM has not told us how much power and torque it's cutting. I don't know what the big secret is, but there is a secret there, obviously. The street and the track modes are basically identical, full power, full response delivery.
Yeah.
So it's not like the street mode is a little bit calmer and the track mode is wilder. It's the same mode, but the settings are a little bit different. So in track mode, you get launch control. They
Correct.
mentioned wheelie control in the briefing, but it's nowhere in the documentation. So I'm going to assume there is no wheelie control.
They explain what wheelie control is. Basically, it will avoid the front wheel.
Only in launch control. It doesn't otherwise work.
Nothing.
So during launch, it can control a wheelie. Otherwise, it can't control a wheelie. And apart from that,
Basically, the screen layout is different in.
yeah, the screen layout is different, and they've put a lot of options on the bike. But the way to access them is very clunky. Okay, because to change from track mode to street mode, you basically have to either slow down or stop. Then go into the menus and click, 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 click until you can change the mode, which seems kind of counterintuitive. Right. So the more options you get on a motorcycle, you have to resist the temptation to just stick them into menus because it's easy to do. But the challenge really is, how do I make it useful to the rider? I'm not too worried, honestly, because the street and track mode don't do a big variation for you apart from the layout of the screen. So it's not a big deal yet. But tomorrow, if this KTM were to have a 20 bhp rain mode, and let's say a 35 bhp street mode or full power street mode, but very gentle throttle map, and then a full aggressive track, and you'd like the rider to switch between them quickly, then this playing with the menus and trying to get to it, having to look down at the screen and all that, is just a terrible way to do it.
Right.
So they've cleaned up the dash. They've cleaned up how it looks versus the old one, which was cluttered and will throw all the information there is at you. It's very well organized. But now I'm struggling to deal with the menu system, and there's quite a bit of stuff in the menus.
Okay. They've given us adjustable suspension, which usually would complicate life. But you said
they've done something very clever there, right? So if you think about it, preload could be set by a screw type device, and it's infinitely adjustable preload. Right, so which gives you a lot of granular control, but also makes it harder for inexperienced riders to deal with, right? Which is why 5 or 7 step preload is easier to deal with. So what KTM have done is they've got separate function forks. So you've got compression and rebound, 5 clicks each. So you don't have a lot of settings to play with. So I've said there is a scientific way to set up preload, which is measure this, measure that, subtract this, and it should be 30, 35 mm, whatever. Or it's 7 settings. Pick 1, 2 settings in the soft direction and see what happens. And if you like it, you're probably going to need softer preload. It's just a matter of figuring out which of the 3 clicks left are the right click. In the same way, you've got 5 steps of compression, 5 steps of rebound. Take a notebook, write down what you did and how it felt. And I think in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks, you'll know which setting works for you.
And is the rear suspension adjustable?
Yeah. So you've got preload and rebound at the back. And you've got compression and rebound at the front. So it is adjustable enough, I think. But this is not what we call fully adjustable. Fully adjustable would mean preload, compression, rebound at both ends that it does not get.
And how much did you mess around with the settings?
I didn't have to. I know why he's asking this question. That's because all three of us rode this bike with adjustable suspension, and over the 220 odd kilometers that we put on this bike, none of us felt like we had to mess with it. KTM has put us in a spot by saying, you wanted adjustability, here's adjustability, and then we didn't adjust it. But I promise you that when the bike comes for a road test and we have more time with it, then we will mess with these settings. Because if you see the video, I'll link to it. When I started working on my KTM 390 Duke over those 9 years, the biggest change I made was adjustable suspension, and then adjusting it slowly over time to finding a setting that works for my pace, my preference, and my feeling for what I think is good suspension. I don't know that you'll like it. I love it. So to be able to fine tune that on a stock motorcycle, I think is a huge leap forward, even though the base setup itself is a huge leap forward.
Yeah. From my perspective, I was really lucky to get a lot of time on the track, and I kept saying to myself that this is going to start giving up at some point, right? Because, you know, the pace is going up, the tires are getting hotter, the track is getting hotter, all of that. And heartbreaking, all right. Change of directions, all right. And the old KTMs, I mean, if you didn't have the suspension, right? Like, the rear suspension, if you hadn't at least bumped up the preload for a heavier rider like me, the bike would start to get loose real fast. Right, it would start squirming under you and all of that in corners when you're throttling.
Yeah. So what I really enjoyed about this KTM is that it just sort of does all the things that we expect the 390 Duke to do at a very high level. So refinement, I have some concerns, but they're not major concerns. It handles very well. So they've tightened the steering angle by half a degree. Trail is down, so it steers quicker. You've got a lighter machine with more torque. So all the responses are better, but the suspension itself is also better. So together, it comes together in a bike that flicks very smoothly. I can't call it super quick because there are bikes like the Charisma which snap into lean angles. The KTM doesn't do that. I can't call it lazy either because it's just not. So it's more or less doing exactly what you think it should. Again, at a very high sophistication level. In that sense, this bike is just such a step up, even from generation 2, definitely from generation 1. So in the corners, you're going to love it. The weak point again is tires, but it's not as bad it was the last time, right? They're still Metzelers, they are H-rated, and we were told that the tires have been updated slightly for this machine, but they were told that these tires are exactly the same as the previous machine. So either the suspension and the chassis are making more out of this tire, or the tire has changed. I'm not sure which. I can tell you this. You can go very, very, very much faster than before without these tires creating any kind of movement that you'd consider unnatural or unsettling. At the limit, they do have some amount of movement. And to me, if you put this KTM on Eurogrip Pro Talk Extremes or Apollo H1 or a Road 5 or a M9RR, M7RR, they are all fantastic tires.
Or the same M5 is in W rated.
M5 W rated is not just hard to get.
No, I'm saying just like for like.
It's just hard to get. So I'm saying if you buy a 390 Duke, don't worry about these tires. Wear them out. When they're worn out, don't get these tires. Again, you can do better than this.
Right.
To me, the top of that list today in terms of price to grip is clearly the Eurogrip Pro Talk Extreme. Below that is the H1. And if you're willing to spend on an imported or a branded set, then M7, M9 and Road 5 are all super great tires.
Right.
The Pro Talk Extreme is just an epic tire in the dry and the wet. It will make this Duke absolutely sing. Because to me, the chassis is still held back primarily by the tires, and you have to be riding at a very high level to access that level of performance. It's brilliant, actually. On the brakes, the hardware is the same as the RC390, but the master cylinder design has been updated.
Oh, really?
No performance advantage as such. But that was a slightly older design. This is a slightly newer design. But they're saying in terms of what it does on the brakes, the feedback you get, there is no change. I honestly didn't have a complaint on the braking system. I think you had it.
Yeah. So just as a quick, I enjoy talking about it. So the disc brakes on this are different, like they're the same as the RC. So you'll notice that they have a much larger diameter, but they're slimmer. So what that basically does is, the way it's carried on the wheel, basically that helps save weight. But the big advantage is because there's such a large rim running around, it cools better. So it gives you more consistent braking, and along with the lighter wheels, all of it is lighter, which means steering becomes better, right? So I've ridden the RC hard. So it was a bit surprising that this, at the end of the back straight, when I was going to turn that fast left, was getting on the brake to lose some speed. I did find that I was getting fade.
Some fade.
Yeah. So I had one run where I went into the runoff area. At other points, I realized that I'm not getting as much as I wanted. It could be with this bike. I don't know, something.
I don't think anybody on the street is going to experience that though.
No, I don't. I mean, even despite that, I was pushing that bike hard everywhere else. It was just that one place where I had to take a bit of care.
But
everywhere
that's the one place where you're nearly breaking from top speed down to what, 110-ish.
It was, I mean, it was practically locked at that point,
Yeah.
right? You were at 168, whatever, right? So that's flat out with me on it. So I'm not complaining about that. It's just that it was unexpected. That's it. And the entry of the bowl, 160, you're entering.
Yeah.
Work.
Yeah.
So no, I mean, it's not something I'm going to be worrying about.
Right.
And I'll look out for it when I ride the bike the next time to see if it happens at any point, right? When you're doing that. But you brought up one thing, which the chassis, right? I go kind of speechless whenever I start thinking about what the bike is doing. Maybe you want to...
I can't do speechless, honestly. But you have to understand what this KTM represents and what they've managed to pull off, because it has implications on other bikes now, right? So you've got a larger engine, but you've also got more ground clearance than before. They've got an underbelly exhaust, which causes the swing arm to be slightly asymmetric, but you've got lower seat height also in the process.
Oh, we didn't talk about that.
Right? So it's a bike that has compacted itself in the vertical dimension. I would extrapolate that straight to the upcoming adventure.
Of course.
So as soon as you look at that bike, you're going to get a motorcycle that is, on the one hand, less seat height but more ground clearance. So you fixed one big problem of the adventure. This bike has more torque, so you can get the feeling that you needed to go off-road a lot easier with this engine configuration, with this chassis configuration, than you would be able to earlier. And I would say KTM will probably go back to a steel subframe for the adventure bike, because then you have to account for luggage and pillion and all of that. So it has a more load carrying requirement. So if you were to extrapolate from there, this engine should lead to a very nice adventure bike. On an RC, that would another be epic bike again, because it's just easier to ride this bike faster. And the suspension quality has gone up from what the current RC has, which is, I think, due in 2 years though. So the cycle should be Duke now, RC's last, and adventure in the middle. But if this engine goes there and does these things, it'll be epic.
So coming back to the chassis, the thing is, last time that we were at the track was with the RCs, and that's the sport bike, right? And that's the one that does the track stuff beautifully. And I remember I got off that bike and I said, it doesn't feel like it's a motorcycle that I've already ridden before, right? It's an update, whatever. It felt like it had unlocked a new level.
Yeah, it was so easy to go fast on the RC. Yeah.
This feels, I mean, basically, I can't add it up. It doesn't make sense what this bike is doing, what that chassis, and in this is the chassis that just feels magical.
Yeah, it's so good. It is so good. I agree. So the engine, I think, could be improved further if they had got a tighter control over the vibration, for example. I don't know what the fuel economy on this bike is going to be like, etc. But if they could get that engine's vibration to be calmed down, this would be a great engine. But this chassis is just another level of brilliance. It's just easy. So I came out onto the street and I rode through the traffic that you get on the way from the Chakan plant out to the highway. And I left it in higher gears just to see what would happen. That's where I discovered some amount of vibration. Am I uncomfortable with it? No, but I expect that the larger 390s, the larger Dukes have some amount of vibration. It's okay. But I was able to get to 24, 23 kmph in third gear.
Right.
Then fourth gear. In fourth, it can't pull away from that speed.
Right.
But it can settle down in third, stay steady, and then when you open, it pulls forward.
Correct.
Not gently, but not super aggressively either. I enjoyed that. Then you come out on the highway and wind it up. And the first time you do it and you're not used to this motorcycle at all, you're instantly doing 125 or 135. Oh, wow, this is quick. Then you start to modulate down. And then you realize 100 arrives so easily that they've really got that sense of strain out of this bike at what speeds you would normally see every day on the street. And that scares me a little bit.
Right.
Because it's such a high level of ability delivered with so much ease that if you think of the 390 Duke as a beginner motorcycle, I think you're making a mistake. The 125 Duke can be a beginner motorcycle. The 200 Duke can be a beginner motorcycle. The 390 is a very serious motorcycle. And anybody who has 3.5 lakh rupees and are thinking of buying a 390 Duke, please take a moment and think about what your experience in motorcycling has been so far. If you've not ridden a 250cc or a 30 bhp bike for a substantial amount of time, you're not ready for a 390 Duke. Right?
And even, so to take that for more advanced riders or who have been riding for some time, There's a very nice parallel, of course. The first gen we used to call as the cheat code bike, right? Anybody could get on, no experience. And you could ride fast. You could do stupid, make mistakes, and get away with it, right?
Yeah.
That bike allowed us to learn how to ride, right? It was that bike. It, like we always say, right? It reached out a hand to you and said, come along, right?
Yeah,
I'll
it
take
led you
there.
on, yeah.
Whereas the second gen, the new Duke, and I owned both of those, right? The new Duke, the second gen Duke, became more of an expert's motorcycle.
Yeah.
It became way sharper, way quicker in terms of the way it steered and also the performance.
Yeah.
It was very exciting. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But it also became a lot more to manage when you're riding really fast.
Correct.
If you made a mistake on that bike, chances of getting away smiling and saying, oh, that was a close one, were far lower.
Correct.
And I think a lot of people ran into that trouble very, very quickly, assuming that it would be just as easy and friendly as the first gen. With the third gen, you're getting an amalgamation of the two. You're getting the safety net that the first gen cast
Correct.
in terms of its behavior and manners, and the sharpness of the second gen, which is an incredible combination. And when we were talking about the tires, you had told me the new spec tires, right? So I went in saying, oh, I'll have more grip. So I was going for it, right? Assuming that they are...
Yeah, better, right.
Did I have any trouble?
Not really, no.
I went on pushing through this fast left, which is, you really crank it over, you're in third gear at the lowest. And when you start to push, it's fourth gear. And you go hard on the gas, you're on the gas throughout, the bike starts to get loose. And it kept on doing that. It started doing that small slide, okay, till one point where it actually stepped completely out and went for a high side, right? It went till here and then it caught, right? Now, I want to think that it was me who controlled it, right? But it could be the electronics. But basis what Shumi experienced, the electronics cut in abruptly. So this time, on the basis of that, it wasn't the electronics. Then it has to be the tires, which means they're still performing at a fairly high level. Somehow this chassis is managing to make... That's what I thought about it then. That is the suspension and the chassis that are managing to get a lot more out of them. Maybe.
That's what I'm saying. So if you imagine upgrading this tire to a top class tire, this bike will be insanely good, right? So I had two issues with the electronics. As much as there is traction control, it's a little abrupt. But ordinarily, I would not complain about abrupt traction control. If you remember, the first generation ABS is a very abrupt ABS. It just doesn't feel nice to use.
Right.
But it's there and it works. So we've not complained about it, but the whole bike is so raw that you don't notice that the ABS is also raw, right? This bike is so highly finessed in so many other departments that when the traction control comes in with a very heavy-handed intervention, you notice it. It almost feels like an actual misfire. So you'll be opening the throttle and suddenly again. So there's a lot of movement in terms of the suspension when traction control cuts in. And I'm hoping that KTM refines that further so that small interventions don't need to be such huge suspension movements. So you can carry on with your life.
Right.
And if it is really
so it's
required,
like a cough and a stutter and practically.
yeah, if it's really required, then you have a heavy-handed intervention. It would be, right? But every intervention shouldn't be heavy-handed. Similarly, the red line on the bike that we rode, I could never figure out where the red line would arrive. So you're on the move, you're past 9. At any point now, it will get interrupted. So over my 5 laps, obviously that's not a lot of time, but over my 5 laps, I could never predict when the red line would cut me off. So there were corners where I would just short shift knowing that the red line would interrupt me. Because look, there's so much talk now that you don't really worry about the last 2000 revs. Here and there, it's 2-3 kmph, it's okay. Earlier, the quick shifter wasn't working that well, so you'd get interrupted in other places, right? The quick shifter up and down, it works in both directions flawlessly. At half throttle or less, it is a little bit jerky, as many auto blippers are. But when you're going flat out, it just works. So you've got so much finesse in so many departments that these two things stand out to me. Obviously, we are over the moon with this motorcycle. Let me tell you the usability issues. It has a very few of them, but it does have them. Wind blast should not be an issue. The meter console actually does a pretty decent job of protecting.
Oh, really?
So it shouldn't be too much of an issue. But if you're not regularly riding at 150 plus, like at a racetrack, wind blast shouldn't be an issue anyway, right? Anybody who's doing steady 80s, steady 100s, steady 120s, wind blast honestly is more of a mental concern than a physical concern. It will not tire you out.
Taller riders?
Tall riders, that's what I'm coming to. Thank you. Tall riders will struggle with this bike a little bit. So I'm 6 foot tall and I had no space left to move front and back on this motorcycle, just like Generation 1. It's not restrictive. If you remember, Gen 1 had a tank that went out and it stopped a place where your knees couldn't go any further. This bike has a lot of room there. So you'll be able to fit. but you'll not be able to squirm around because the seat is not that long anymore. So at the racetrack, if I scooched back a little bit, like to hang off, I'd immediately beep against the seat stop. On the straight to tuck in, I had a GoPro mounted for those 5 laps. And I couldn't get the helmet and the GoPro to sit before the screen. So I eventually had to go further and further back on the bike until I was
Which helped me.
literally properly sitting on the pillion seat and tucked in. So space is going to be a challenge. And whenever we say space is going to be a challenge, then touring itself as an extension of that becomes a small challenge. Now, if you think about it, you've got more ground clearance, you've got more torque, you've got more pulling ability, you've got a lot of electronics that work quite well, you've got great suspension, but you're going to lack space and there is some amount of vibration in the handlebar. So this could have been an amazing tourer, but it'll be just short of super great.
I wonder why they didn't make it a better tourer.
Also remember, there's a 15-liter tank now. And I don't think that's an accident, because if you remember, this is an E20 compatible bike, and ethanol mixed fuels will give you lower fuel economy. So you will see fuel tanks getting larger to accommodate so that you get similar ranges. Globally, ethanol blended fuels are also cheaper than petrol, so that even though you're getting less economy, you're filling more fuel, your overall maths remains in the same place. We don't know what India is going to do about that. But that's why you have a 15-liter tank. Until E20 comes, it will give you a range advantage. After E20 comes, it should return to what the 13.5-liter tank was doing for you.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
What I'm really kicked about is that despite all of the stuff that they've added to this bike as standard, despite the level at which all of this equipment is working, they have not gotten greedy yet. So this bike is only 13,000 rupees more expensive than the
I think they've been
outgoing bike.
generous.
Yeah, but I don't think that that's going to last. So I think this is a price which gets you the idea of a 390 Duke back in your consideration set. And then slowly this price will rise. And I think it will rise quite a bit in time. Okay, because today, if you think about the TVS RTR 310, which just came out, if you add adjustable suspension and the IMU equipped electronics to it,
Which is about the
you
same.
get to more or less the 390 Duke's price. And I think the difference is 7 or 8,000 bucks between the two. And which makes the RTR recommendable only to people who are not ready, we believe, for a 46 bhp bike. Everybody else should just get a 390 Duke anyway.
Right.
It certainly makes the ZX4 RR at 8.5 lakh rupees ex-showroom.
I couldn't believe that was for real.
That's how many Duke 390s again?
Well, almost 3, no?
No, but look, if you're in the inline 4-cylinder, 400cc, 70,000 RPM, if that's your cup of tea, please go for it. I'm sure it's a great bike. But to me, I can imagine it as my 8th bike or 9th bike. I can't imagine it as something that I would use on a regular basis. I'd just not spend that kind of money. If I buy any 3.5 lakh rupee bike, that means I have 6 lakh rupees left to travel with it and do stuff with it, which is to me far more value than buying a motorcycle for that money. So, but we are getting distracted. Is there anything else about the... Oh yeah, the service and maintenance schedules remains exactly the same as before.
Exactly the same?
warranty remains exactly the same as before, no changes there.
Amazing.
And KTM's service and parts prices have never been expensive. They're still not going to be expensive. So in that sense, this is going to be a pretty value for money bike to live with for sure, even if the price starts to rise and acquiring 390 Duke becomes more expensive. Also remember, we love 390 Duke, so we keep an eye on this, but the arrival of the 3rd generation should mean that the 1st generation bikes, which are already down to 70,000 rupees, should become even cheaper in the used market. So if you've been looking for a 390 Duke, 1st gens do well. They were pretty reliable.
Are you planning to sell yours?
No.
Are you planning to put the forks on?
Yeah. So if you've not seen the video from which we made about 9 years with my KTM, I've done a lot of suspension work. And I think my setup today is actually still superior to this new KTM's suspension setup. But the forks are the weak link because I've got the stock forks with a preload kit. So to me, these wheels, these brakes and these forks on my bike should improve my experience. So I'm going to explore the option. I think it should cost about 35 or 40,000 rupees. So it's not going to happen in a hurry. But yeah, it's definitely something I'll think about. But should I upgrade from a 1st gen to new gen 390? You could. There is a step up for sure.
Dramatic step up.
Yeah, but to me, if you're upgrading, you should be looking at something about 2 times the horsepower, because then it is a genuine upgrade. Without it, it's a change, and it can be a great change. But an upgrade to me is 2 times the horsepower. And obviously, you can only do that 1 or 2 times before you're looking for a 500 bhp bike. So it's not like a arithmetic curve that lasts forever. But at the beginning stages, if you've ridden a 7 bhp bike, your next bike to me should at least have 15 bhp. It's an upgrade. It'll teach you a few things and give you enough headroom to grow into it for the next 3 or 4 years that you live with it. Then from that you get to about 30, same logic. From 30, you get to something like 60. After 60, you go to 120 bhp, you're more or less done. Because from 120 to 150 to 170 to 180 is just a progressively more frightening curve. And if you don't go to the racetrack, you will have no access to any parts of that curve for any serious amount of time. So you won't be able to think about it. So then it doesn't matter.
So any of you nut jobs out there are thinking of modding a 390, get it up to 60 horsepower with this frame and with those Pro Torque tires, and
It'll be crazy.
tell us what it's like.
Yeah, it'll be crazy. It'll be crazy, yeah. Just to sum this up, KTM have really, really hit this one out of the park. We have a few issues with the bike. I don't think tall riders will like it all that much. Please take a test ride and figure out if that's the situation. There is some amount of vibration in the bike. I'm not going to say it's a deal breaker, but I'm setting your expectation of a non-smooth bike. The faster you go, the better it gets, right? Some of the electronic interventions are a little heavy-handed. You're not going to like them, but that's what they are. Again, expectation setting. And the price is good today, but if you're going to see this video 6 months from now and try to decide whether you want to buy one or not, maybe you want to recheck the prices before you do. And if you're watching and you're not in India, then you should know India gets a 800 saddle as standard. You guys are more likely to get the 820 saddle as standard, and you have a spacer on the saddle that you can remove and convert it into an 800 motorcycle. In India, we don't get that spacer at all. So if in India you wanted a slightly taller seat because you're taller and you want more space, you're going to have to buy the entire 820 seat again. I don't know what the prices are, but KTM's working this out. The bikes are otherwise identical. As far as I am told, these M5s are going on all the bikes. So the international bikes are not getting any other tires either.
All right.
So we are the same bike as anyone. The bookings are open, and by the time you watch this, I think delivery should start. Because we were told that 17th September, these stories can go out. And that's roughly when the bikes will start arriving in showroom. So you should be able to get test rides, and delivery should start shortly after that.
I got nothing to say.
Okay, so if you've got any more questions on the KTM 390 Duke or on the 250 Duke, which we'll do a separate story on because we haven't written the 250 Duke yet, leave us a comment. We try and answer almost all the comments we get. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
It's very rare that you will be able to experience magic firsthand and be able to do magic. And this bike will give you the opportunity. If you have the opportunity to get one and go to a racetrack, you absolutely must. Because so often why we fall in love with bikes is because how they show you what's possible, and then what you thought was impossible suddenly becomes accessible. And this is one of those bikes. So if you choose to get one, make time, make space in your life by way of money or whatever to just see what it can do.
As you can see, we are pretty emotional about this new generation of the 390 Duke. They've really done a great job. If you like to discuss it with us, leave us a comment. And what I ideally think you should do instead of leaving us a comment and discussing it with us is go get a test ride and then discuss it with us. Because then I think you'll be on the same page as us. Thank you so much for watching.